It's a great pleasure to discuss this topic with two great panelists who are at the frontier of developing these skills and addressing these challenges. Welcome Catharina Bening, who is a senior scientist and group leader and the chair for sustainability and technology at ETH Zurich. And Henry White, who's the Chief Executive at Sustainability Unlocked. So thank you for being here. Just to kick us off, Catharina, can you give us a sense, based on your research and experience, what are the changes that companies are going through in terms of their business models, operational models, and what do they mean for the employees and the skills that they require?
Yes, thank you very much for that question. I think a luxury of our time is that we are not short on crises. So there you can pick anything you want, climate change maybe even being the easiest, on what you want to optimize for. So I think what has changed, if you were asking me for a historical perspective over the past decade or so, is there was quite some certainty in the past 10 years in terms of, okay, there is this goal of achieving net zero. How do we get there? So we optimize finance, we optimize maybe technologies. But now where we are left, we heard this morning, okay, the technologies are there. We've talked about finance. But now there are so many exogenous shocks, and how do we deal with this? And I think this comes down to very personal decisions on the executive level of steering your company or whatever organization you're leading towards more stable times, or at least more stable times for your institution. And I think this requires very much a new skill set that you have to develop. And that also changes the way that we teach at ETH, but also beyond, without assuming that you let students leave with a standardized skill set and then they'll be fine, but probably they will come back and embark on a lifelong journey.
And so we have heard, you mentioned there are new skills, a new skill set. Henry, I know that you are obviously working a lot with companies across the board, but what in your experience is the sort of gap in skills that they require versus those that employees currently are equipped with?
So thank you for having me, Matus. In terms of the skills gap, I think the first thing to say is that currently it is wide, it's significantly wide. And there's actually a stat I keep going back to, it's actually from the Economist Impact event last year, and that is that only 3% of organizations currently have the skills required to meet their sustainability commitments. So significant gap. And what we do at Sustainability Unlocked is we work with some of the world's largest organizations in order to help them navigate the skills gap. And we typically try and work with them and answer four main questions. So the first is, who in an organization is responsible? Who has that pain? Is it sustainability teams? Sometimes work with L&D, with risk and compliance, or the exec and the leadership. And actually, the more senior you go in an organization, better buy-in you get, the easier it is to distribute. Secondly is, what types of organizations? Where are they on their journey? It can differ vastly from organization to organization. Thirdly, and probably most importantly, why are they doing this? Is this a box-ticking exercise, or is it a strategic imperative, and is it driving culture? And then lastly is, what does success look like? How do they measure it? What are the kind of tools? And that's when we start to apply our solutions to their problems.
Right. And give us a sense, why is it important? Why is a skills gap a bottleneck for a company? Why is it strategically important for companies to address and bridge that gap?
Sure. So a lack of skills is seen as one of the key blockers for stopping a sustainable transition within organizations. The WBCSD, they launched a excellent report last year called Catching the Wave. I highly recommend people go and watch that. They are the World Business Council on Sustainable Development. They have over 200 membership firms and account for about 70% of the world's emissions. And the three key blockers, they said, the first is about the sustainability being seen as the short-termism. And obviously at the moment with things like the Net Zero Banking Alliance, 6 US banks pulling out from that, companies aren't thinking enough long-term. Secondly, we're seeing that sustainability is seen as a cost center. And thirdly is lack of skills. So it's seen as that kind of imperative. And if we flip it on its head, something came out from Morgan Stanley, which looked at 300 organizations, and the most significant value driver for driving sustainability outcomes of a really long list, and 85% of those organizations said this, was it's driving value creation. That was the main reason. The second was regulatory and compliance. And the third was moral obligation. So I think in the past, previously, it was because it's a box-ticking exercise or because it was the right thing to do. Now it's a strategic imperative. And I think just anecdotally, since we started 5 years ago of creating that platform, it's turned from a nice to have to really a must have and a strategic imperative.
And Catharina, do you see that the same, that it's sort of changing in terms of the why? Why are companies coming to you for your programs? The sort of leaders in those companies coming to your programs. What are the sort of rationales? What are the reasons they come to you? What do you see in your experience?
Absolutely. So what we like to say in the EMBA, that is the name of the MBA, is that we embark on an alpine journey. So what we try to do is we try to take executives on a journey and give them a view from the mountain and then come back to the valley with a new skill set, ideally. And so part of that journey, and I think that is very important to stress, is that they embark on this very radical business model innovation that they try out in their company. So what is, I think, new to our MBA and important to us is that we measure behavioral change. So it's not that just that you come to our MBA, go there 18 months, go back and say, hey, I earned an MBA. But it's about, okay, what kind of change have you implemented in this time already in your company? And I think that is of utmost importance.
Right. And is there a difference? And Henry, I know you work across, companies, sectors, etc. But is there a difference in the types of upskilling programs that you provide that are targeted, say, at employees versus leadership? What type of programs do you work with when it comes to sort of helping companies develop those skills in-house?
Sure. So I think answering those key questions is understanding where those skills gaps are. And typically in organizations, it is enterprise-wide. We need to start with a common language, raising awareness, creating kind of a baseline of education. And we then try and we work kind of top-down initially. So that's with kind of very curated learning pathways to certain cohorts. But also what we really like to see is when we have kind of super learners, super users who just, because the tools are accessible, they can just kind of run away with it. And something that really kind of backs that up, that Deloitte shared, which is that of the millennial and Gen Z audience, the top request to sustainability teams is actually sustainability skills. So we're seeing that kind of across organizations. And I think the thing that's required, and probably a lot of people in this room, I imagine, from sustainability professionals, they have been probably trying to be poached. There's a huge war on talent across organizations. And rather than just kind of keeping that trend, we need to educate our own employees, or educate from within. So if 400,000 employees are needed for the green skills transition, only about half of that is predicted that we have capacity for currently. And in this country, we have amazing bankers and accountants and lawyers and scientists and so on. And if we redeploy those capabilities and those competencies, then we have a real good chance of making headway in the transition.
And are there any factors in terms of what programs tend to work or don't? What works in your experience?
So good question. I think what works is when you have senior level buy-in. I think that probably relates to your exec courses as well. So it's probably quite a visual representation of actually of success of some of our most successful customers. When senior people are actually willing to get behind camera and be recorded. So, for example, the CEO of Danske Bank we've filmed, We've filmed the Chief Sustainability Officer of LSEG, but also the chairwoman of Santander. So we've launched a platform of collaboration with Santander to educate the UK public in net zero. And these are kind of very real shows from very senior people that they believe in this, that they care, and then that kind of goes through the organization.
Is that your experience? Is that why you're sort of targeting the sort of leadership, or and how do you work with the executives? Is that different than working upskilling employees?
Well, first of all, absolutely. So also research shows, and I think also studies on financial performance show absolutely, if you do not have executive buy-in into sustainability goals, you probably will not going to thrive on this. We study especially a lot of innovations, sustainable innovations on their journey and how they come into market. What we often see is that companies or engineers in companies try out new innovation in stealth mode, which might or might not be a good sign, but then there comes a point and either top management says, yeah, this is what we want, we give you the space to experiment and so forth and so on, or not. And that obviously is a huge sign to the organization. So if you do not have this top level buy-in, then probably you will not make it on your journey towards sustainability. Nevertheless, having said this, we do not sell crystal balls in Switzerland either. But nevertheless, I think the art will be to navigate through these different forces, as I said earlier, and what Henry said also. So it's not only about regulatory compliance, and the lady that was sitting here from the Swiss mining company said earlier, well, we need a lot of regulation. Yeah, obviously, we need a lot of regulation for a level playing field. That's true. But I think it is also very important to understand what regulation will be next, not only in terms of compliance, but in terms of strategic positioning. And that is what we try to teach or understand better.
And so how do you sort of, how do you incentivize the sort of very top leaders? How do you sort of foster that sort of leadership and the mindset of change among the very, very top senior executives? How do you reach them?
Well, first of all, there are a lot of companies, Unilever, Nestle, Siemens, just to name a few, who have already made sustainability or the achievement of sustainability goals part of their executive payment. So that's obviously not on us, but that is a strong incentivization to say, okay, we have to learn and educate more on this topic. We in the program, we try, as I said earlier, to focus on very concrete projects in these 18 months to showcase to the organizations, okay, first of all, there is someone who has this buy-in and to run this project through their organization, but also to get others on board on this journey. So that is very important for us. And then obviously it's also about networking, because I think also, as the Glencore lady was saying, if a single company is reaching out, maybe that is not the drip in the ocean, or maybe not for Glencore, but finding allies is a very important aspect.
Right, and I guess also, as you mentioned, the sort of demonstrating, showing, measuring impact, right? So, thinking about all the benefits and the importance, the strategic importance of the upskilling programs and the sort of skills and addressing the skills gap at all levels within companies. Still, why are we not seeing that being the sort of default by all major companies if the benefits are so large? So what are the key barriers? And there is a question actually from the audience here. It's why do companies still keep paying sustainability consultants instead of building out sustainability teams in-house? So Henry, in your experience, what are the barriers? Why are not more companies doing this at scale?
So yeah, it's a great question. I think it goes back to that senior level sponsorship. If you don't have that sponsorship, you don't have the ownership, you don't have budget allocation, and then at the ground level, there's already a huge amount of training fatigue within organizations for kind of mandatory work, but also people incredibly time poor. We work a lot with financial professional services, and that's probably their most important commodity. So I think that's the hardest thing to get over. but in terms of, I think that what's quite exciting is that, yes, going back to that point at the start, there is a 3%, only 3% of organizations have kind of cracked this. But the real good news at the moment is that there's a spotlight on skills, and that's actually not because of sustainability, but that's because of AI. But we're benefiting from that, and because of employers are now thinking, how do they upskill their workforce? Employees are thinking, how do we stay relevant? Then it's a great conversation to have. And if you just type into ChatGPT now, what are the 3 most relevant skills that I need to stay relevant in the next 5 years? Number 2 is sustainability. So hopefully that kind of trend continues. And I suppose the good news is that of those 3%, we are working with some of those, and we are seeing some good success stories. So it is moving in a positive direction.
Right. Is the number one sort of using AI?
It is.
Yeah, absolutely. Of course, we cannot escape AI in any of these conversations. But Catharina, from your side, from your experience, how are you thinking about that sort of like technological change, AI? Is that featuring in your sort of approach in your programs at all, or?
Absolutely. So not only in my daily business with students, I encourage them to use AI. I think everything else would be, well, we are in an ivory tower, but still we have Wi-Fi. So I think everything else would be ridiculous. And I think we have to understand it. It will be a tremendous change on how we work. So, for example, preparing for today's event. Otherwise, I would have asked the student assistant and say, okay, tell me something about Henry, and please don't spend more than 2 hours. Now it took me, I don't know, maybe it's not accurate, your CV, but it took me 3 minutes. So obviously accelerating this and also understanding, coming back to sustainability, okay, what are the system level effects? But what is the basic understanding that I need for my sustainability risks from my company? AI is a great tool. And in terms of education, we need to educate people on how to use it. And then to understand, okay, what is the human skill that can be used to build upon this?
Yeah, absolutely. And unfortunately, we're running out of time, but just to sort of a final thought, obviously we are 10 years in from a Paris agreement. We are 10 years of the Sustainability Week that we are running. Where would you like, what are the changes that you would like to see when it comes to skills, whether it comes from the businesses or from policymakers or educational systems in the next 10 years, in the next decade? What changes would you like to see? Is there any single thing that you think is vital for us to address, to see happening?
Sure. Yeah. So I think it's going back to like, it's identifying that skills gap. No 2 problems are the same, and therefore no 2 solutions are the same. It's taking the opportunity that the spotlight is on skills at the moment, and if you get that right across the organization, enterprise-wide, but being very specific on specific cohorts and specific use cases, making it tailored, then you're going to see green lights across the organization. And compliance going to be happy, sustainability going to be happy, the exec are, and you're going to have a strong culture within your workforce, which is going to enable real change.
Maybe I'm a little less optimistic, but I think it would already be surprising to me if we could afford in 10 years discussing if sustainability should be on the agenda or not.
Right.
So I think that already would be surprising. I think that it's number 2 in ChatGPT is great. But I think by nature it will remain top 3. And it's just a matter of time how quick we will be able to respond to this. And I think maybe the biggest impact, or at least for me, is education. But everyone in the room has his or her own lever.
Right. So I guess that's still relatively optimistic note to end on. So thank you so much, Catharina, Henry, for this fascinating discussion. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Thank you. Please join me in it.